Welcome to Smartocto Real Talk, where we talk for real. And today, in this episode, we have Dmitry Shishkin, former editor of the BBC. And we're going to talk to him about the user need model. Dmitry is an award-winning digital transformation leader who was one of the first advocates of the user need approach at BBC World Services. And it became world famous, and it even resulted in a nickname for the model, Dima's Wheel of News Need. Well, today we're very lucky to be able to talk to you, Dmitry, and we're very eager to find out more about these user needs and why they are so important to newsrooms in their everlasting search of being relevant in the online domain. So, for starters, could you give us a short intro to the user needs? What are they and why are they such an important model to newsrooms across the globe?
Well, the user need model is a very important model for content creation because it ties the content production with the actual notion of what the audience needs rather than what the newsroom is interested in publishing. And I'm saying it with total realization that every media organization has its vision and mission and why they exist and everything. And so I'm not saying that you suddenly need to forget about it and only use the user need model, but it certainly is helping you to connect with audiences better. It certainly helps you with prioritizing the content that you're creating regularly better as well. And everybody has less time to do things these days, and there are too many things that everybody has to do. So actually making those bets and making those calls every day is very, very important. For me, as an editor, this particular model is a wonderful, wonderful way to engage the newsrooms and engage audiences as a result.
How did the user need model actually came along? Where did it find its roots?
We went to the markets and spoke to people about asking them very simple question. Why do you consume news and what do you want to get from news? And that was a very open question. We didn't have any agenda. We didn't have any kind of pre-agreed model that the answers need to fit in. We just really wanted to see what people are consuming, and then hear their explanation as to why they are consuming certain things. And that opened our eyes to this wonderful model, which ended up being a model of user needs, because what we learned is that people were tracking their usage of all the news and everything else, and then they would come to the group meeting, and we saw lots and lots of similarities in what people were actually using, not in terms of subjects, but in terms of the reasons why they were using one thing or the other. And we realized, and that was quite a shock, I guess, to many people, that actually people want much more from news than just to be updated. And that was the first thing that basically, led us to many years down the line to the conversation you and I are having right now.
So you did the survey, you actually started talking to the audiences. Were they young people, old people? Was it a mix? Was it heavy users or just, only visiting through the web or just web-based?
Yeah, it was all sorts of people. And that was important, right? Because we can't suddenly say, of course, the BBC being a public service organization, we couldn't just say we only are concentrating on this particular segment of the audience and that's it. No, we needed to have a diverse enough offer that would satisfy many different segments of the audience.
Well, I think many people, of course, saw your Google News presentation with the Mo Salah examples. But to go in real short, can you because there's 6, right? There's 6 user needs. Can you define them?
So there are 6 reasons why people consume news. And there are 6 things that they expect to be satisfied with when reading news. So the first one is straightforward, is update me. Just something that has happened, I want to know about it. Second one is keep me on trend, which is about tell me what social media reaction to that event has been and what are people discussing. So this is not only about how people are reacting to a particular news, but this is also about some investigative pieces why certain things is trending on social media. So you can explain that further. Then another 2 ones can be grouped into kind of quote unquote head departments. So they are more analytical and they have more background. So one of them is give me perspective. So this is an typical piece would be an analysis showing different perspectives on a particular subject. So by the time of finishing reading this piece, a person would be able to actually formulate their own opinion on a particular subject. So you're showing, on the one hand, on the other hand, this expert says, that expert says, whatever. And then probably one of my favorites one is educate me, because we, as journalists, we tend to I think as journalists, our appreciation of what audience knows about a particular subject is a little bit inflated. I think we need to unpack lots and lots of things for people because they are not journalists, and then they're not boiling inside that, that broth, so to speak, that news broth, that every single intricacy of it. So it's about explain it to me, explain what words mean sometimes. What we have found out is that if people are not comfortable enough with a subject from the intellectual point of view, they will be very anxious to engage with it. So we journalists really need to unpack topics to people. And the last two, they broadly, unlike head, they probably appeal to the heart type of coverage. So you've got the Inspire Me user need, which is basically lots and lots of stories about something inspirational that has happened in the world. That upon reading this story, somebody will be delighted to be part of human race. So it's a story about personal stories, normally personal stories about people who have gone through something difficult, and then they persevered, and then they have triumphed, so to speak. And the last one is another wonderful user need called Divert Me, which is about providing a more balanced news diet on the day. So not only bombarding people with kind of hard topics, but also kind of showing something which is a little bit more lighter. And just one thing to say about all of the user needs is that user needs do not correspond with different formats. It's the wrong way of doing it. All user needs are always corresponding to a story. And that means that if you wanted to, you could take one story and create 6 different articles satisfying 6 different user needs, still on that very agenda, whether it is elections or anything else.
Exactly, because many people think that the user needs are not about covering the news, but you're saying it is all about covering the news, but it's just from different perspectives and relating to different needs that audiences might have.
Ultimately, it's about relevance and it's about engagement. The trouble is that I am advocating for this model because I think that this model connects with people in a bigger way, and especially if you as a journalist can actually signal that this piece represents a different user need, because we can fall into the trap of writing a really wonderful educate me piece, and the headline for this piece still will indicate an update me angle, and the people will just not engage with it. So I am all for being very explicit, finding your own niches, finding a myriad of niches that you can tackle, and user needs definitely will guide you from that, because it's otherwise it just your coverage will be very similar to coverage that people will see in the market, right, left, and center.
Today in Smartocto Real Talk, we have a conversation with Dmitry Shishkin about the user needs model and how it helps newsrooms across the globe with writing and commissioning better journalistic news coverage. In many statements, you always say growth will come, right? When start working with the user needs, growth will come. Is this particular true for specific user needs, or is it the whole palette of user needs?
I think it's important to always have a really healthy diet of your news coverage and your news. I guess the supply of news you're giving as a newsroom to a particular audience. So when somebody comes to your website, and I totally appreciate that majority of people will never visit the front page because they are going from social or search and they go to an article story. But then you need to work with your product team to make sure that the whole breadth and the width of your coverage is still evident on the story, on the article level as well. So those things aside, and that's why I am becoming a very big advocate of content and product almost becoming one in modern newsrooms, because you can't really satisfy anything properly without those two things being properly aligned. So, and I guess the growth will come because you will be engaging and you will be constantly monitoring and iterating and fine-tuning your coverage, because and again, don't get me wrong, you still are covering the news, you're still covering the agenda, you're just doing it slightly in a different way, right? And if our colleagues, our dear colleagues from the product side of things, have been iterating on the product development since the start of the internet, and they would be doing all sorts of things about, whether this button works or that button works, or, anything. Like, all of these things they should have been introduced into the newsroom thinking years ago. And some newsrooms have been very, very good at it, because if you're creating content that nobody reads, to put it bluntly, then why do you exist in the first place? If you are an organization that is covering, if you're a local organization, then your user needs by default are going to be slightly different than if you are a broadcaster covering, say, the whole country. Because your user needs can be very specifically linked to your area somehow. And in the same way, if you are a niche publisher of a particular product or covering a particular topic or sector, those sectors can bring their own particular slants on the user needs. So ultimately, it's about you have a vision and mission, what you want to achieve. You know that the audience is out there, and you need to capture it and engage them. And then you need to listen to them and say, well, are we doing the right thing for you?
And as you mentioned, they sometimes try to challenge the Dima's wheel of news need, it's been called, right? So they challenge it. And we have some examples. TRT has their own versions. I think Vogue did a research and came up with a user need, which is called Make Me Feel Responsible. And now we're working with some local news publishers, and they have a user need that is called Make Me Feel Connected, for example. How do you think about that? Is it fixed? Should it be these 6, or are you open to them? Do you actually believe that they exist?
Let 1,000 flowers bloom, I would say. It's. I think that I'm not saying that there has to be 1,000 user needs. All I'm saying is that I was so happy to be this public advocate of user needs around the world on behalf of the BBC, because I knew that ultimately the whole media sector will become healthier. The trust in news will go back high where it used to be, if the engagement and relevance, those two things will grow. And they only can grow if there is somebody, your audience comes to your website regularly, engages regularly, participates regularly. And I would say, I would stretch that user need model much further than that. You need to be opening your newsroom conversations to the audience. You need to constantly be having some kind of audiences councils where you run the weekly output by the audience and asking them the questions. It's like there is no reason why we can't use what our UX and designers colleagues are doing and product people are doing all the time, where you are showing them, different types of things that you have done. And looking at the data as well, still being truthful to your vision, to your mission and everything else. But ultimately, it's about, if you have an audience, say it's 10 million a month, and then you start unpacking it, and then you're realizing that 90% of that audience consumes one article a month, then can I be bold enough to ask you whether you have an audience in the first place, or you have lots and lots of traffic that just passes through, but when it comes to engagement, because ultimately, reader revenue models and the monetization models and everything else are going to go away from the blunt instruments of display advertising, and they inevitably will go down to the sign in and registered users and whatever. And I'm talking very broadly here. Even the public service organizations are exactly the part of that as well, because if you're public service but you can't prove that the audience actually properly engages with you, then there's going to be lots of voices saying, why do you receive public funding in the first place? It's basically sitting at the heart of the existence of every media, in my opinion.
Do you actually believe that there are new, because you saw them as well, probably these new user needs? Are there any in there that you think that are promising, or that they are missing out in the model that you came up with?
Well, I think everybody wants to be updated. That's right. Although you can be a media organization which actually doesn't do news but only does analysis. And if it only does analysis, then the question is, what do you do with daily output? Do you react to it? Do you completely ignore it, or you only are using the daily news as pegs to do your proper analytical work? I think everybody will want to be to be educated and kind of things to be explained to you. So I think the model where give me perspective and educate me can merge into one. I think it's fine, and that's where you can potentially have 5 user needs or bring the 6th one of your own, of one way or another. I think the social media one is, again, it might not be relevant to the audience. For example, I don't know if you are looking after gardening as a media organization. You are not in news anymore, so news needs do not really correspond. But actually, you still need to go out and talk to your audience to figure out what the breakup of your daily output should be, right? So I think as long as there is a material evidence of why certain user need is introduced into the wheel, then you're fine. I think the worst thing that can happen is that if an editor and editor-in-chief sit together for 2 hours, 2 of them, and just decide what those user needs should be, then that is completely wrong.
Yeah. What I find interesting is we worked within Smartocto also with the user needs, right? We just brought in the idea of this, the way of commissioning stories through the user need. And it's always vivid, it's always inspirational. If they take a moment just a little bit longer than they do normally, they come up with so many more interesting ideas, headlines, etc., that it's almost unbelievable to think that they don't make this as a traditional part of their way of covering the news, right?
I love it. I love doing that, and I love seeing the changing faces of the newsroom participants when they actually get some space to think about something else. And you know what? The truth about this is that you will be spending additional time to plan a particular special report or special project or some kind of investigation or something, and you will spend a lot of time discussing those things. But actually, when it comes to the daily news coverage and daily output, suddenly it's somehow, and I know that I am probably kind of exaggerating a little bit, but just to make the point, I think people tend to go into that kind of quote unquote, and I'm again, don't please be offended, the listeners. They go into this kind of sausage factory mentality of just outputting, just for the sake of outputting. And again, I might be exaggerating, and but I think my point remains the same. It's much better to publish 1 article a day, 1 less article a day, but use that collective 1 hour to actually improve what you have published before, to discuss and challenge things that are still yet to be published, and to prepare for tomorrow. We need to make sure that on a daily basis there are people who are always using data to make informed planning decisions.
In this episode of Smartocto Real Talk, we have a conversation with Dmitry Shishkin, who became world famous as evangelist of the user needs model that was developed by the BBC. Today, Dmitry works on a special project with the data analytics company Smartocto, who is well known for their actionable data solutions and the way they support newsrooms all over the world with notifications. And of course, we're very anxious to find out more about this project that is called N, which stands for News Needs Notifications. Dmitry, can you tell us in your own words what this N project is all about and why you're so excited about it?
Well, the reason why I was really excited, I'm still really excited about working together with Smartocto, was that I was always fascinated with anything to do with data and media. And I don't mean data journalism side of things, although this is also very exciting. I mean how newsrooms can actually utilize the data and do their coverage, improve their coverage and the rest. And I was always of the opinion that we are facing a new era or a new chapter in the analysis of what the media organizations do. Because in the past, we used to know very well about what has happened on your website or on the app. So you would have an overnight reports and the rest of things. Then suddenly everybody started doing the what's happening on your website right now. So this was about how deep people read and where they go from one page to another, what's happening right now, all the trends. Also very useful. And then suddenly I'm thinking that this is now the time to basically open that new chapter. We're saying, well, can we actually look at what will happen or what should happen in the future using data? And I'm saying it again with my editorial hat on and with my change manager hat on, where you actually say, I'm not going to be dictated by what data is showing me. No, it's not about that. It's about like give me an arsenal of things, and then I will make a bet and I will make a decision. So the project that we are working on is to figure out whether if an organization is sticking to the user needs approach, and we are analyzing everything that we know about that organization in the past and right now. Can we actually, using algorithms and machine learning and smart technologies, can we actually extrapolate it to the future to figure out whether we can send smart notifications to newsrooms about an opportunity that they otherwise might have missed? So, and then suddenly a notification comes from Smartocto saying that we know that this piece has been trending on this particular topic and doing very well for you. What we know about your traffic and what we know about the past, we actually are suggesting that if you can take it further with this particular user need, because again, we also know something about this particular topic and the user needs, and we can nudge you to do something about it. And then suddenly it will be so helpful to editors, because suddenly you realize, well, some done the grunt work for me, the legwork. I will still make a bet whether this one or the other one is better, but thank you for the insights.
So that would also be the most welcome outcome of the project, right? That we are able to actually notify newsrooms on specific stories or topics, actually use this user need.
I see lots and lots of applications here, because they actually have a lot of product implications for the newsrooms as well, because we will be able to identify interesting trends. I can see how Smartocto can become incredibly useful, almost like a middleman between the big data, which is almost always undecipherable and very hard to take actions from, and the immediacy, which is also very fleeting and disappearing, right? And I'm seeing that, like, I was very privileged with the BBC that we used to do those monthly deep dives, we call them, where you analyze the hell out of the output and then you come up with actionable recommendations of what can be looked at, whatever. Majority of smaller newsrooms will never be able to do that, right? Because they just don't have enough time and whatever. And I think if Smartocto is going to be able to actually help newsrooms with that analysis, with that immediate, show me everything that you know about my economics coverage against this, that, and the other variable. And that would be amazing, because then suddenly you will start being able to get smarter notifications, not only on what needs to happen tomorrow, but what needs to happen in the next quarter. And, it's the possibilities are really endless here.
Yeah, and so you could actually notify on an update me story, because you already made it, right? And then you give a notification like, okay, the audience wants more. Try from a perspective that relates to this user need. You could actually say, today you haven't brought any whatever user need perspective stories, so maybe that would be a good thing. Or we could even say these topics tend to be really relevant if you bring them from X, Y, or Z user need perspectives, right?
Kind of the golden spot is in figuring out how different variables are connected with each other at any point of time. So you can have formats and genres and topics and sections and user needs and all of these things. If you start interrogating the data between them using data, then you will start seeing lots and lots of interesting things. Like, for example, effectively you will be saying, if you are thinking about writing an analysis about economy, don't bother do it as an interview, because the interviews have historically done much better for you. Those types of things. So I am very excited about it. The opportunities are endless, because you then can start using all the data to personalize the experience of people, to influence the sign-in process, to create editorial products. Because suddenly you can say that actually our Educate Me pieces are doing so well, let's launch a newsletter about that. Those types of things. It's really incredible.
You also mentioned formats, right? Are they actually connected to one another, specific formats and specific user needs?
Well, they can be. An analysis or say a first-person video can be an Inspire Me piece. Just the first person. You don't have an correspondent in the piece. Say a video, a listicle in a video format can be an Educate Me piece very easily. Of course, you can have a minute video or 2 minute long video with embedded tweets and embedded Instagram posts and Facebook posts as a keep me on trend thing. So formats are connected to them, but not directly. You always need to see the connection between a topic, a format, and a user need, because it's not a direct line between them.
You mentioned the notification of Smartocto, right? Is this also how you see that the user need model can be helpful in relation to relevancy and engagement? Is the solution the notification?
Well, ultimately, we can only do so much from our side, right? The newsrooms need to live and breathe those concepts, and they need to own the coverage and the strategy. So if you suddenly realize, it's impossible to move the dial on the engagement metric in 1 month for any organization. You can only do it consistently, and you only will be able to do it by improving every section of your website one by one, because you just can't, a website as a whole doesn't really mean anything, right? So you can just say that every single person working on a particular subject, they need to see, right, okay, I have a health beat, for example. And of course, health beat during COVID is one thing, but have I ever gone out and spoke to my audience about what would they consider to be a good health story? Mm-hmm. Because I remember at the BBC there was a lot of there is a wonderful company called Harken, which is a US company which basically deals with all sorts of user engagement, where you involve users right from the start before the story is done. And I remember the correspondents at the BBC really were being very surprised about what questions people are asking them about their specific things, about education, about health, about whatever. And then you suddenly realize, right, okay, if you are interested, if you are surprised, great. So now you can actually start thinking about doing things differently. But the wealth of the information you can give to people, which is connected to news one way or another, is endless, really. And that's why you can, every sector or every section or every organization will need to find its own way of improving engagement.
Yeah. Well, this Harken model that you're suggesting is something that we've been looking at from Smartocto as well, because it's interesting because the audience, for people who don't know the Harken model, right? He believes that real impact takes place after the article has been published, and the audience only knows that the article has been published after it's been published, right? And so that's when they start reacting on the story mostly. But then the author, the journalist, is already busy with his next story, so to say. And one of the user needs could be make me feel part of the news, right? Or make me feel connected to the news, or make me feel as a participant to the news. And this could be really related to the Harken model.
Participation, especially it's relevant to local, because you can't, you all live in the same area, your kids go to the same schools, you go to the same supermarkets. The newsroom guys and girls are part of the fabric of society. And you need to go much deeper than that. Literally, if you're an editor of a local regional newspaper, how often do you talk to what you do to your parents at school gate when you drop your kids off? You can say would you rather we do this, or would you rather we do something else? And then suddenly you realize, well, actually they don't broadcast to us, they actually broadcast with us.
But what we hear a lot is okay, so data brings us into a bubble, right? It only shows us what the audience wants, and if we bring more what the audience wants, it's not journalism anymore. Maybe for user needs, this could go up as well. How come they commission how we should create a story? We know best of doing this. What would be a good way of replying to this?
I'm not buying. I think that the user needs come from people, and if you have been broadcasting to people or writing to people, publishing something without actually knowing what people want. And also, like you want to be a little bit more kind of pushbacky, so to speak. You can actually go and say, well, if you know everything so well, explain to me why your engagement level is so low.
This is Smartocto Real Talk, a podcast on data, innovations in the media, and digital transformation. In today's episode, we speak to Dmitry Shishkin, one of the founding fathers of the user needs model. The widely adopted model that got developed by the BBC is a lively model and always subject to change. So, Dmitry, how do you look at that in relation to the model? Is there a future for user needs?
You need to better understand things like where do people go from one article to another at a scale, right? You need to understand how your funnel works. If your publishing funnel is a conversion funnel, you really need to understand what user needs contribute to which side of the funnel and at what point of time you do and what is the right balance. I remember there was one example with one of the BBC teams where it was a given that any audience at the BBC always would be fascinating to read about the neighbors. So if you're a Russian team, you will be writing about the Baltics, Ukraine, the Caucasus, and the Central Asia, and people will be reading it because it's kind of their universe, right? Everybody in India will be extremely interested in reading about China. But actually, then when we looked at Chinese traffic and Chinese team, and actually nobody was interested in India. And we made the bet initially to actually start writing more about India because somehow we thought from maybe our kind of, British perspective that the two big, superpowers will want to know more about each other. But it was just not the case, right? And it might become the case in 2 years. So you always need to kind of keep your pulse or finger on the pulse, so to speak. And so I touched upon the earlier thing about the product and how you can actually connect the content and product much deeper than that. And user needs are going to be an amazing thing for product to go and experiment all sorts of things. I remember when we were launching 12 new teams around the world for the BBC, we actually launched them. Their websites, their front pages looked structured according to user needs. Which was a very fresh way of launching the pages like that.
Yeah, I understand. But the user needs they started from 2016 about, right? That's when you guys started with it with the BBC. There lots of changed in the digital domain. I mean, there are new channels. Instagram came, Instagram Stories, Instagram TV. We got TikTok now. I think the whole music industry is driven by everything that happens on TikTok, as far as it goes for millennials or Gen Z people. Young people don't connect really to news anymore. There is a trust factor in place. So is there any future development expected from the user need model if you take this development into consideration?
But that's the thing. I would challenge the notion that young people are not interested in news. They are. You need to tell them the news differently, right? And I think I've seen some successful journalists already being on TikTok, and nobody is asking them to actually explain the news on TikTok, but you can actually show, say, the behind the scenes of what is happening on your feed there. So like every channel is going to be completely different. The news will never go away, and people will the health of democracies is based on the quality of the news and the quality of people being informed. So I'm not pessimistic about it at all. I actually think I'm using an example of Spotify a lot, where they started with songs, then obviously albums came about, but the real sophistication of data and came when people started creating playlists, because then create all sorts of playlists. Because there is a myriad of niches, as I said earlier, and in music you can do the same. In news you can also do the same. It won't be, you won't have all myriads of niches represented on your particular site, but at least you will be trying your best to make, say, 5 or 10 niches the best you can for your own audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always say to friends that the new DJ is called Spotify, right? Because the curators on Spotify, they actually determine if a track will grow big or not. But do you expect something like a Spotify for news? Is that what you're saying? And that user needs can be helpful to that?
Well, no, all I'm saying is that you can actually start shaping the content for yourself within your own organization, almost on a playlist basis, because you can start finding those connections between different pieces of content, different types of news, different angles in a really nice way. So you actually you will be able to structure your content in a way that you always will know that actually there is no point of connecting a politics story with, say, an entertainment story, because they just never work together. But actually, those correlation and causation, obviously, machine learning will help us to figure that out as well. But ultimately, it's about mixing and showing people a reason to be in their lives, right? So it's and then potentially there is, I think, a very famous statement that the price is only a question when the value is not clear. So and consider this: your vision and your mission as a media organization will always be questioned by people. Yeah. You're not going to be bringing value to them, and ultimately, it's always about bringing value to it, either monetary or intellectually or inspirationally.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's like some people always know the price, but never know the value, right? Yeah,
precisely.
Yeah. And the examples that you named, the Nike and the Adidas, those are also very good in co-creation, right? They even let people create new sorts of materials, new sorts of shoes. So people will probably feel very connected to the brand.
No, completely. And going back to our own sector, like the news and everything, it's about. The more you talk to the audience, the more trends you will know, and and that's why I guess one of the problems why media has lost its trust with the public, or why the media was getting the results of any upcoming the elections in the past came as a surprise, and why? Because suddenly media stopped talking to people, and they started pushing the agenda that was not connected to people's real life every day. And our job is constantly to kind of, again, put the finger on the pulse and remember that.
So news, it's not mine. That's what people think. It's not mine. It's theirs.
Yeah. And then suddenly when you go and say, actually, tell me what you want, I promised to tell you, like, one last thing. I promised to tell you one story. We used to have a very cool project at the BBC called BBC Pop-Up Studio. So it was a BBC pop-up. It was basically a roving studio, a roving office, which was going from country to country or place to place, spending a month there, opening the stay with an evening in a town hall, asking local people to come in and using post-it notes, tell us about the stories they want us to do. And it was always incredibly refreshing, because actually it was about, like, irrespective whether you're in India, in Russia, or in whatever, Boulder, Colorado, suddenly journalists listening to you and actually interacting with you, you suddenly will say, well, actually, I will use them again, because they once asked me about, what my view of the world is.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
Should do that more often.
Excellent.
Well. Thank you very much for this conversation. Is there anything we did not touch that we should have spoken about, or is it just pretty much?
I think we pretty much covered everything we wanted to.
Thanks for being in the show.
Thank you for having me. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This was Smartocto Real Talk. Thanks for listening. And if you want to get more insights from Smartocto or the User Need project, please visit smartocto.com or read our blogs, or subscribe to our newsletter.